you are. Here I am. Is everyone here? Come on over. Turn up the volume. Shush the people in the back. It's time for Everything's Relative, a podcast about DNA surprises, DNA discoveries, DNA shocks, all the kinds of DNA results that might flip a person's world upside down and inside out. I'm Eve Sturgis. I'm your host. I'm an NPE. That means I found out that one or more of my parents isn't biologically related to me. In my specific situation, it's my dad. That's the most common kind of NPE, but it doesn't have to be the dad. It can be the mom. It could be both parents. Basically, if you can or cannot imagine it, that is what we're talking about here at Everything's Relative. We drop a lot of acronyms around here. I'm an NPE. Others identify as DCP, that's for donor conceived person. An LDA stands for late discovery adoption. BCF means birth certificate father. And WTF means what the... Just kidding. Before the podcast launched, like when I was in the planning stages, I thought I knew what my life would be like and what I don't know how to explain it, but I imagined what it would be like to have a podcast. But I continue to be surprised by these like little treasures that have appeared in different ways and all the ways that I didn't see coming. Some of those, like I've talked about before, about learning more about America and its people. I'm considering relationship dynamics all the time in a new way. I think about my own family and the concept of family in a new way. And of course, I'm talking to lots of people, which I did expect because that's the concept. But I didn't expect to make real friends, like special friendships that would not exist any other way. And that is what I think of. I think of like this kind of unexpected development in my life when I think of Ivan, who is my guest today. I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but I think Ivan first reached out to me a long time ago, like in the early days of the podcast, and he said something super simple like, "Hey, great work." And maybe later he mentioned, because I responded and, said, "Hey, thanks." And he said, "I work in broadcasting. I know how hard this is. You're doing really great." Something like along those lines. And then he told me he was listening because he had a suspicion that his son wasn't his biological son. Ivan suspected that he was a BCF, a birth certificate father. And later, he confirmed he's not my son. And anyway, every once in a while, over the past few seasons, I just get like one or two notes from Ivan with like a small token of support. I always look forward to hearing from him. And then finally, recently, Ivan said, "Eve, I'm ready to tell my story." And then I had to reschedule him over and over again. But here we are, finally. I'm not going to say any more. Ivan tells his story best. So here you go. I'll meet you on the other side. Thanks for being here. I'm Eve Sturgis, and this is Everything's Relative podcast. Okay, so every time I point to you, you say something cool, okay? Hey, Dallas, do you want to make a podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money.
Wow, that's awesome.
All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters.
I don't know how it works.
It's okay. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today.
Cool. Can we set it up now?
Yeah, and then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard.
Awesome.
Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch.
Wow, I'll download it right now.
Ever since I discovered Spotify for podcasters, food tastes better, wine tastes sweeter, and I'm a better mother to Dallas. Isn't that true?
Yep.
I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hey, Eve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi. So this is so cool because we've been in touch for a long time.
Yeah.
You've kind of been a podcast friend for this almost like the whole time, I think. And
Yeah.
yeah, and then I asked if you would come on a while ago and you weren't ready.
You know what? I don't think it was the right time. I think it's like if anything I've learned, it's like timing is the thing that makes a big difference, you know? It's like
Oh yeah.
there's no other way I can explain it.
Yeah. Yeah, no. But it was just so I felt excited when you reached out again and said like, "Hey, I think it's time.
I think it's time. It's go time.
Go time. Green light."
Green light.
Yeah. So I know just the tiniest bit of your story and or why you find yourself like in our community.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm in the center of it, you know? It's a weird thing.
Yeah, you really are. So, first of all, or I don't really know if I need to say first of all, but where are you? You're in San Diego?
I'm in San Diego. I'm about maybe 150 miles south of you.
Okay. And have you always been there or did you
No,
relocate
I'm
there?
from Texas. I'm from West Texas. So I've been in San Diego for about 20 years now. 22 years.
Okay.
23? 23. Let's say 23.
Okay. 23 years. That's pretty solid though. That's a pretty like you're
I
a
think so.
San Diego resident. So tell me, so yeah, how do you tell this story?
You know what? I haven't really, the only person, I'll tell you this, I've only spoken to priests and therapists about this, and my wife, obviously. And
Wow.
and actually now I've had the conversation with my family.
Uh-huh.
So and obviously the audience there is different each time, right?
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like first off, before anything else, like I just wanted to say thank you. Like I wanted to
Oh,
legitimately say thank you because um, I know how much work it is. I know how hard it is. I can only imagine how difficult it is to bounce all these things. And then I felt kind of bad because I was like, no, this is really important service, right? But I kind of felt like, oh man, that's not fair. Like I'm putting pressure on, you know, somebody who's doing this as a labor of love and is helping so many people. But I needed to say that because it is, you have no idea. Like I've been through this whole thing it's been about a dozen years since I've been dealing with this thing and with the situation, I should say. And I don't think anything has healed me as much as listening to other people's stories and conversations. You know what I mean?
wow. I'm so glad. I mean, I'm just so glad that you found it and that it's helping. That's just
Yeah,
that warms my heart so much. And it's been rewarding. And these conversations are really, really why I do it. And you're right, everything else is pretty hard. but, I,
yeah,
but it's when I get to connect with people that I feel really good. Right now it feels really good.
that's
Um,
good.
yeah. So
Yeah, I've actually found out about your podcast through a mutual friend. I mean, I consider him a friend, even though I don't really know him as Dick.
oh yeah, sure.
That's actually how I found out because he's a guy who is like a mediator on one of these Facebook groups,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
he's like the gatekeeper who let me in. And then he first posted about his story, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know there was because I listened to a lot of podcasts. I was like, I didn't know there was a podcast on NPEs, and there was like that was like the rabbit hole that I went down, and it's kind of crazy experiencing. Like for I just say like this is crazy, right? This whole thing
Mm-hmm.
is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think anybody can prepare you for like the scope of the things that you come across. You know, as and I'm not even an MPE, but I'm like MPE adjacent, right?
Right, right.
And even then, like I just touch all these different things and I go, wow, man, look at that. That's something I mean, you don't really think of it until you see these things kind of like unfold. Or you're like, oh, wow, I never imagined that that situation would happen, you know. And then also, if anything, it's actually changed my consciousness about things where I think I'm like nothing phases me, I don't think anymore when I hear somebody's stories, you know what I mean? And I'm sure as a therapist, you probably go through that all the time as a therapist.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Like I it's I guess it's like it's a pair I don't know, it's not a paradox. That's not the word I want, but it's like a it's both are true. Like I feel like this experience, having my own experience, but mostly the podcast experience, has like opened my eyes to just the extent of unfathomable events, that are happening in people's lives, or like unfathomable layers to people. And you don't know what you don't know, but it is like infinite, you guys. And
Literally.
so yeah, so like continuing to be amazed and surprised, and truth is stranger than fiction, like all of that is true. And there are themes that have I've become accustomed to, um and it's that kind of the same as a therapist. Like I feel like I've like heard everything, or I have an unbiased, I can be a sounding board, or and then something will come up that just gets me. Like you just possibilities are endless.
Hmm. So I don't know how I tell the story. What I was going to say is I am the birth certificate father to an NPE, and I am also a newly discovered brother to an NPE. And I was, just to give you some context, I think it's important, not because I want to go deep, deep, deep into it, but I am the youngest of five. The closest sibling I have is like 15 years older.
Oh,
And yeah, and then
you are a surprise baby.
I was very much a surprise baby. But if you listen to my mom, it's because God had a plan, right?
Right.
Um, but
I loved that plan. Thanks, God.
right.
You brought us,
Thank
Ivan.
you. I'm here. I'm here. I made it. And single mother. My oldest, who is my son, but he's not my biological son. Um, he was born when I had just turned 19. So I was leaving high school. I was in college. I was just setting up in college, literally. I was like 2 weeks into college. And what had happened was I had dated his mom for a couple of years in the first years of high school. And then as we were leaving, we decided to just hang out. And I went away to college, and oh, and I mean, she'd had a boyfriend before and after, and and I went away to college, and I was there for about a week or two, and all of a sudden I remember, it's funny, back in the mid '90s, I don't know if it was a letter or a phone call,
Mhm.
and it said, I'm pregnant, you have a son on the way, and you need to move back, you need to come back, and so I was like, wait up, how is this possible? This isn't even possible. It's like this doesn't make sense. But being that I was a son to a single mom, and I had a dad who was um, very much absent,
Mm.
very much disappeared, very much not in the picture, very much all the things that I worked hard my life to not be, right? I said to myself, well, she's telling me this. I'm not going to doubt it. I'm not going to question her on it. Why would she say that to me? And it felt really strange to ask for a paternity test. You know, I was
Mhm.
like, I just said that doesn't feel right. Like she's obviously um, coming to me because this is what it is.
Because you have faith in people.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, exactly
it's just
right.
unfathomable. Like it wouldn't even occur to
The
me, the
thief thinks
alternatives.
right. The thief thinks everyone's a thief, right? And so I was like, okay, and I kind of my new life that was starting. I kind of packed it up and said, okay, let's make a U-turn. And when the semester was done, by the time the semester was done, about a week or two later, my son was born. And
Oh, wow. So
uh,
she didn't tell you until well on his way.
well, and I think it was by design. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the more time
hmm
passes, the more I realize it was like there was definitely a plan here, and there
hmm
was
hmm
definitely. I feel like I was definitely like in the con game, like that. I'm the mark, right? It's kind of
Right.
what I
Right.
realized later. I went, oh wow, um,
Oh, sucker.
yes, yes,
Well,
sucker, this nice
oh,
guy.
yeah, this nice guy was only 19. Do you remember like telling your mom?
Yeah, I did, and it was crazy because my mom, she just turned 91. So back then she was, I'm going to say, 28. She was like 63, right?
hmm
And she was the only person who did not make me feel bad.
Oh,
Yeah, like everybody was like, "Oh man, what are you doing? You're ruining your life. You're just starting." All these different things. And it's like, and obviously it's coming from young people for the most part. Maybe an adult or two would just kind of give you a sigh, or like, "Oh," because they kind of know the difficulty. I don't think it's a judgment thing looking back on it. I think it's just like they know how difficult it is to raise a child, especially when you're a child yourself
right.
and you don't have the tools, right? Yeah, my mom didn't make me feel bad. She just said, well, I'm here for you. I'm here for what you need. And a child is a gift from God. That child needs to be loved. And, you know, so there's never a moment. Um, it is funny though, when he was born, my mom went to go see him in the hospital. And back in those days, like it feels so ancient, right? They
hmm
used to put the babies in like a like a massive room, and then
Yeah.
they would cart the little cart up, right? And you have like the
hmm
last name or whatever.
Totally. You used to be able to go look at it, like at the hospital, be like, oh, let's go see the baby room. You could
Right.
go
Yeah,
look
the
through the window
baby
at all
room.
the babies. Yeah.
Right. And when she saw him, she said, that doesn't look like you. That's not your baby. Like literally, she just like low key said it. I don't think she even realized she said it. And I was like, what? And then I was like, oh, okay. And time goes on and time goes on, like, and I remember I was going to a friend's, like, there was a pizza party at like a pizza place, like 6 months later. And I was talking to this guy, and we were in theater together. I don't know if you know this, but theater people tend to be a little bit dramatic.
I've heard. Yeah.
And he says, so I heard you're raising a kid that isn't yours, like just flat out. And
What?
I was like, what is with this guy? This guy's really catty, like what's going on with this guy? Like, why? I don't get this. So time goes on, and I thought, no, these are just like gossip people, because I don't know if you know this, but theater people kind of gossip.
Yeah,
I
totally.
don't know if you heard this, right?
Yeah, I know this.
If I would have believed every rumor about everybody,
Right.
so I was like, I brush it off.
Were you now in a relationship with this girl or just being like a
By
parent? Okay.
default, no, by default, I was like, okay, so I guess we're doing this, and I'm not going to be in a situation. First off, I'm not going to be, looking back on it now, I realized a couple of things. Number one, I didn't trust that this child was going to be well taken care of. I'll put it to
Mm-hmm.
you that way. It's like there was just like an innate sense of like, this kid, he needs somebody to look after him. Like I can't not be there for him. Something tells me I need to be there for him. And it's not like a martyr mentality, it's our savior mentality. I think more than anything else, it was like, I don't, what's funny is I can't imagine my life without him.
Like it was paternal. You had a paternal protective intuition.
Yeah.
hmm
And like my life is so much better now, like in
Mm.
this very moment, that I can't be upset about all this stuff. I just can't. I mean, I allow myself to feel frustration sometimes, but that doesn't even happen as much anymore. My mentality has really shifted. So yeah, so I came back, started a relationship, back up, and I was going to college. I used to work as a reporter, so I was working as a reporter at the paper, but I was also as a copywriter at the TV station, and I was also working at a hotel overnight, um, just because money was really tight, and that went on for a couple of years. And about 3 years in, the mother of my son says, this is really ridiculous that you haven't married me and we're going through this, and how embarrassing it would be for a 3-year-old, maybe even a 4-year-old, to, if they ask them, to say like, oh yeah, my parents aren't married.
Oh.
And yeah, and so it's like,
I guess I never thought about it that way. I guess it
yeah,
might be embarrassing for them.
It might. I don't know. I don't think those conversations happen, to be honest
Yeah.
with you.
I don't know. I'm not sure 3 and 4 year olds have embarrassment.
Right. Like
Like,
they're in
especially
pre-K.
about like the social constructs of, well, whatever. We get it.
Right. Yeah. They're like, hey, did you hear that Ryan's parents got married through a civil
Yeah,
ceremony?
totally.
Right.
Like they're all like at the preschool level, just like
Right.
they live together,
Right.
but they're not married.
Right. That's the typical,
Mhm.
like, what are you having for lunch, PB&J? Did
Yeah.
you hear that
Yeah.
Ryan's parents were at the Elks Lodge? That's where they got married. It was so tacky.
Oh,
Right.
not
No, I
not
don't
even
know.
at a church.
You're right, exactly.
Yeah.
Not even a proper church. And so, and I said to her, I was like, look, I don't want to make a mistake where, we take a tough situation, like I was like, we're still like kids, like we're still finding our way. And this is working out okay. Like we're finding our way through it because I think like something in me was like, something's not right, man. Um, Eventually I acquiesced, like, 4 years in, and I didn't think anything of it. It's like, okay, I was a working dad essentially, and this parent was absent. It was the strangest thing because I just saw it happen more and more and more. And then I realized I started to see the patterns, like the same kinds of things that she would tell me. She had a lot of issues. Looking back on it now, when you look back as an adult, story isn't about her. I don't really want to make it about her. So that went on for a number of years. And then,
So she was I mean, I think this is clear now,
yeah,
but when you said like a parent was becoming absent, it was that she was becoming less and less present,
absolutely.
and you were becoming more and more of like a working dad who was working and raising your son.
Yeah, yeah. And, by this time, there was two sons. So he has a younger brother. He's about 6 years older than him. So this was a couple of years into marriage that my second son was born, and probably about he's about 7 or 8 years old when one day I got home and everything was gone. Everything in the house was gone. Everything in the house was gone.
No.
Yeah, yeah.
Was she in
You know,
drama club? What? That is so dramatic.
Seriously, man.
Woo.
Honestly, right? No, and then the funny thing is, like, she moved like two doors down. It's the craziest thing. She emptied the checking account and moved two doors down. It's the weirdest thing. That lasted about a month, and it was an ugly divorce. Unfortunately,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it took like a year or two, and these poor kids, they just suffered a lot. They went through a lot of difficulty, navigating, finding a way to keep things together. And as the time's coming for my oldest son to graduate, like it's always just sitting in the back of my head. Like I think it was sitting in the back of my head since day one, since my mom said that baby doesn't look like you.
So you split up, and then was custody like 50-50?
Yeah, custody was 50-50.
So you stayed very present as a dad, but there was a 50-50 split. But you were still around, and okay.
Yeah, if anything, like my oldest son was trying to just go with me because there
Mm-hmm.
was, they had it was just when you have volatility will find its way into everything, from where are we living to what are we eating,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of things that I would hear about. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
I needed to create stability. I just want to make sure there was
Yeah.
stability there. So anyway, so a number of years pass, and it's just getting closer to graduation. I keep thinking to myself, like, back this is before Ancestry. This is like
Mm-hmm.
12
Mm-hmm.
years ago, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it seems like a different world. They have like these like DNA kits that you would pick up at like Dwayne Reed or CVS or whatever, right? And so I was like, how am I going to do this? If I do a DNA test on them, I can't tell them, you know? So like, I don't lie to him, but I flat out lied to him. I said, we changed insurance and they need to have a cotton swab of us to do something or other. And he went, okay. Then I swabbed and then it was done. And then he went away to college. And so he's away in college. And because I told myself, it's like, I'm not going to find out. I don't want to know anything until he's at least in college, until he's at least 18. I've done my most basic rudimentary commitment, right? Because I want to make sure that if I find out something I don't want to find out, I'm not face to face with them. I can actually have some time to think about things and process, um, and I'm glad I did, because when I got the news, it wasn't new, but it still kind of like reverberated. It kind
Mm-hmm.
of like opened the doors. Every single door from the past just kind of opened up, and it took me a while to even process that. And I would go to priests, and they would all say, "This is unfortunate, but he's your son, and nothing changes, and don't tell him." And I would go to
Hmm.
therapists, and some therapists would say, "Don't tell him anything," and some would say, "You've got to tell him." Right. So that
Hmm.
was like the big question, like what and how and do I,
Yeah.
and especially because like after having gone through something so difficult, and I can't even imagine as a child going through an ugly divorce, all the different feelings that it has, especially like I'm super sensitive when it comes to child development and like nurturing, because it was so important to me. Like I'm really lucky in that I had a really strong foundation in terms of my mom, but there's always issues when you have like an absent parent that you can't ignore. Like no matter how great something is, like I think as a human, I just needed to ask myself questions and analyze what's important. So anyway, long way of saying that I did not know what the right time was. I was afraid I was going to send him into orbit. I was like, he's off in New York. He's figuring out his life. This is his
Mm-hmm.
window, and I'm going to send him off into orbit. It's going to be you know, that scene in 2001 where the dude just floats out into space, right? That's what I imagined.
And had you talked and you talked with your ex-wife at this point about it? I mean, you wouldn't have I'm not sure that I would have thought you needed to at all. Just curious. Okay.
No, we weren't even really on speaking terms, honestly.
Mhm.
Like, so years pass. I go to therapy for years to just deal with this. I'm going to a different therapist because nobody is like prepared for this, especially like back then.
Mhm.
People aren't talking about this stuff. It's not on the radar. And therapists are like, what are you talking about? Like the only time I've ever dealt with that stuff is adoptive parents or something. And there's just no clear answer. Like nobody can give me a clear answer as to like if I tell him how is I going to what are the risks, right? What are the
Mhm.
benefit versus the risks? And I don't think anybody can do that. Um, but the takeaway I got from, after all these years of all this stuff was like, even if it was a not ideal situation, even if it's a difficult conversation, I think everyone deserves to know their truth, right?
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that's like the bottom line. Um, I don't know when the timing is. I'm sure the timing is different for everybody. And I'm sure, as a birth certificate father, like I was excited about having this conversation because I imagine there's a lot of people uh, who have gone through similar things or are going through similar things, especially because these things become more prevalent. These tests are just like they're gonna hand them out as party gifts. I mean that's how they are. They're so commonly found.
Yeah, and I was just thinking also when you said, you decided that or you came to the conclusion that everybody deserves their truth. So yes, like I agree with you, and I don't know if that's a moral value or a philosophical concept, but it almost doesn't matter because the truth is going to come anyway. It almost doesn't, it's almost like, sure, I would love for everyone to come to that higher understanding. However, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like it just people need to understand it doesn't matter.
It really doesn't, and it's not ever an easy conversation. I
Yeah.
can't imagine it's ever an easy conversation, but it needs to happen, it needs to take
Hmm.
place, and like it's crazy because this whole situation has really kind of changed my mind around. Being having an absent father, there was always questions I had about like, oh, am I getting this from my dad, or was my dad like this? Because I never knew him, I
Hmm.
never met
Hmm.
him. You know,
Right.
um, and so it was a lot of those questions, and I'm imagining an MP goes through now, except that
Right.
I was having these conversations when I was like 4 and 5, right?
Right.
Internal.
Right.
I
Right.
could have sworn. I used to think that like nurture was just as important. And when I think about it now, it's like I think it's like 80% nature.
Wow.
It's crazy, especially because
A high number.
yeah, I mean, I'm not a scientist. Don't don't take that number as a as a fact, right?
Ivan said, you guys, Ivan said, you heard
It's
it here first.
80.
80%.
80% with an asterisk at the top
Mhm.
right, and then you look down and it says according to Ivan. That's the
Right.
source, right?
Okay.
Um,
We'll make sure that footnote is there.
that's it. And yeah, because like the strangest things, like obviously, my son doesn't look like me. He talks differently. He has like a different speed and pace, the way his words come out. And I, my wife and I, um, when we talk about this stuff, she said, "Well, have you ever seen his dad?" And I said, "Well, I think I know who his dad was." So we found his dad, and I watched a video of his dad, of his biological dad.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he talked, I said, "Oh my God, that's my son's voice." I said,
Mm.
"That's exactly how my son talks. That's the strangest thing." And it's just like mannerisms and all these things that there's no way my son could have picked those things up. They were just like ingrained in them. And especially as you
Wow.
find out more about DNA, you go, wow, so there's generational trauma. There's all these things that are carried over in DNA that we're barely finding out about, right? And so, yeah, you're right. It is a philosophical question. It is a moral question. As everyone deserves to know their truth. But at the same time, it's like this thing is way deeper than anyone even
Mm-hmm.
realizes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you think about even the moment that somebody is conceived, right? Like that was one of the conversations that I had with my son because I wrote this letter to him. Every therapist would say the same thing: write a letter, write a letter, write a letter. So I said, okay, well, this is one thing they'll agree on. So I wrote this letter like 30 times, like I rewrote it and rewrote it. And I was very sensitive about um, stressing to him that he was the product of a relationship, that he was not, um, it was not something it was not a bad situation. It was not something that was in any way negative. People have
Mm-hmm.
relationships. Some people have 1 day relationships. Some people have.
Right.
So, because I was thinking about that, I was like, I think when you question who you are as a person and you're like further along in the game, let's say you're 20 or 22 or 30, whatever. I, I, I mean, at least for me, I would think like, um, what was the situation that surrounded this? Like what
Mm-hmm.
was going on? What was happening? What was happening in my father's mind or in his consciousness, and my mother as well. Was I born of a time of stress? Was I born all these things?
Right.
That's just my
Yeah, I
nature.
think it sometimes gets boiled down to people sort of saying like, was I a mistake? Or was I not supposed to be here? Or, right.
Right. And that's so crazy because I mean people have used that verbiage for so many years that you don't think about it. But
Mm-hmm.
I think when you're anywhere near that scenario, that situation, at least for me, I become really sensitive about that stuff
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because I think like nobody ever wants to think they're a mistake. Nobody ever wants to think that they just kind of like, they cheated the system and they somehow exist.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
But man, you've got me thinking so much about what is that? What is that about the importance of conception, like the intention behind conception becomes really important. And when did that happen? When did that happen?
right.
When did that become a part of the morality paradigm?
Right. Yeah, I'm telling you, it's really heavy. It's really heavy. If you go if you go past the emotional part of it, and like I feel ridiculous saying that because I'm not an MP. I'm talking to a community of MPs, and I'm not an expert in it. I'm not. But as a birth certificate father, like I've had to really kind of I'm outside of myself enough that I can pick up on different stories and I can heal a little bit. So like I said, this community has really helped me heal when I listen to the stories about people. And some are positive, and some are very challenging. And the positive ones are inspiring. If anything, I remember there was one episode you had where it was a father and son,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they were from Texas, and one of them was like I don't know if it was like a barbecue.
Yeah, Jason and Miguel.
Right?
Jason and Miguel, season 2, best episode.
Season 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, I actually told my son to listen to that episode later on. I did tell him, I was like, you should listen to this. So when the time came to tell my son, it was last year. So I found out this information in 2012, 2013, and I held on to it all this time. And
this whole time
not,
writing and rewriting this letter.
Right, exactly. This exact letter, 50,000 different ways, and reading it to my wife and saying, how does this feel to you? How does this sound? What does it make you think? And
when did you meet your wife?
I met my wife in 2008, so about 15 years ago.
Okay, so he was young. So she's been a part of his life for a long time as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. For both my older boys, like his younger brother actually considers my wife. She says to him, like, you're my mom. Like, you have no idea how much, you have no idea how much you mean to me. Like, you're my mom.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, she's a fantastic person.
So she's been a part of this like sort of narrative and journey with you this whole time.
So when she got hurt, because she was like, I'm going to do my ancestry results. I was like, are you sure? And then hers came back, and I swear to God, she was like, mine is so boring.
Yeah.
Mine is just like straight lines.
Nothing here.
Nothing. There's no questionable cousins. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There's no last names I don't understand. I know all these people, right? So it's like, I think that's like the ideal, right?
Right. Quality. We call that a quality problem.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's just too darn good, right? You just you have to focus on yourself because you can't focus on your family. Because everything is pretty hunky-dory, right? It's funny because I would read the letter to her and she would say, have you tried saying this? And I'd say, no. I heard somebody else on the podcast say, I never want to hear that again. And so I'm very sensitive about not using those words. Okay, well, what about this? It's like, no. We can't say that because this is going to make him think this. Okay, yeah, you're right. I see that. So it's almost like, let's say you're building like a manual. It's like, if I say this, then what can he possibly think? And how can I make sure that I'm steering him this way so that he doesn't? And then you realize like you have no control over how somebody's going to think. Like this is like, those are like remnants of my control issue. It's like I can't control it. So when the time came last year, after the pandemic, after everything, he came back home. He was away in college, and he was away, and he said, I'm coming back. And I felt like this like surge of like nervousness, like, oh no, I'm gonna have to deal with this now. Like now I'm gonna have to deal with it face to face. Now I'm gonna have to think about how and when and why and all these things. And when I sat down with him, I said, would you like to meet me? I just want to talk to you. And we met at a park. I took 2 beers. That was it. I was like, and I said, here, we're gonna sit down. We're just gonna talk. And when I talked to him and I explained things, the first thing he said was, now everything makes sense. And I went, what are you talking about? He said, I knew something was different. I know I'm not crazy, he said. And it was really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because you're like, all this time, you haven't said anything. You've been feeling all these things. You never said anything. Because of course, how can you? Like, you can't pinpoint it, It's like, how can you even, I don't think when you're in a situation like that, how can you even question that? It's like, it doesn't even cross your mind,
Why would it?
Why would it, And he took a lot of time to think about it and to reflect. And he's still dealing with it. He's still processing it. I don't know what that timeline looks like. I don't, I'm there for him. We talk all the time. Like for me, nothing has really changed. If anything, I think it's made my relationship with him stronger because it's kind of torn away all the artifice and all like the situational stuff, where it's just how grateful I am for this young man. And it's funny because if it wouldn't have been for him, I would not have met my wife. He's a really special young man. And, his younger brother is also dealing with this stuff. And we're all just kind of having ongoing conversations. Like we were just back in Texas for my mother's birthday. And so all three of us went, the boys, right? We were like, the boys are going to Texas, right?
Boys trip. Mm-hmm.
Boys trip. And we went to like Ross. That was like the extent of like a boys trip, Went to go find nice belts,
Whoa.
I know, right?
Slow down.
Slow down, right? Yeah, no, I mean, it was just like an ongoing conversation. Like each time it gets a little bit deeper, and obviously you're gonna touch emotions and feelings, and that's not ever easy, but like it's easier now. I think, I mean, for me, it is. I can't even imagine. There's so much more ground to cover for him,
Right.
and maybe he doesn't want to. It's interesting because
Right.
when you hear, like sometimes for whatever reason, men don't want to go that deeply into it. I don't know why. Like I asked my son, would you like to ever meet your biological father? And he says, no, I don't ever want to meet him. I don't feel like I ever had an absent father. I don't feel like I missed anything. So to me, this guy's just a stranger, and I don't really have anything in common with him. And so I said, look, I said, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you're being honest with me and that you're telling me how you feel. I said, but I want you to know, if you ever change your mind, like I will never feel bad. I won't ever feel bad for you wanting to know more about yourself and about your history. And if you ever want to form a relationship, I would never feel left out. I need to tell you that, like, your life is your life, and I'm here for you, like whatever that means. And thus far, like he doesn't want to, but you never know. Time changes people, and your perspective changes as you get older. And if the day comes, then that's his story. That's his story to tell. I don't know. I don't know this guy. I met him a time. Once I met him once or twice.
Yeah, like 30 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like who knows who he is today?
Who knows who he is now? I don't.
Right.
You know what I mean? So then that's going on. And as I'm going through Ancestry, and I tell my younger son, I was like, do you want to get an Ancestry kit just for the heck of it? Just so you know. And he was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, look, bottom line, find a cousin or something or whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't know what you're going to find. I said, I have no guarantees at all. I cannot guarantee you anything.
It is really interesting to think about. I just have never thought about what like a sibling within a triad of that situation might be going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny without him here. I want to put like words or thoughts into his mind. I can't say what he was thinking, but yeah, to realize that not so much the half sibling, but just that the trajectory of your family's relationship and then divorce and everything that came after, it was sort of based on these things might really overwhelm a person, right? With concepts.
Yeah, especially like as you're forming yourself, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because he's a little bit younger too.
Maybe you'll find out more about your lineage at its most basic. I was like, but I can't guarantee anything about anything because I don't know. I thought I knew how the world worked. I thought I knew what my life was about. I've come to find out that's not true, right? Like things are different. Things are different, and I was oblivious to what the reality is, right? I was on the scaffolding of a lie, right? When the building of truth, I don't know, this metaphor, I don't know if it's working.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? So he takes the test, and we're going through the results, and there's no real surprises, and
You are his father.
I'm his father. I'm both their fathers. So I'm meeting up. I have an absent father, so I'm expecting to run into a bunch of people I don't know on these different DNA sites. And I am my father's son, so that's true. And all these cousins are spread all around, and I'm getting all these first and second cousins, and they all have my dad's last name. Maybe a couple of them don't. Some are women, so maybe they got married and they changed their last name. All these things. And I'm talking to a cousin who says, I know about you. Your mom is my uncle's second wife, is the way she put it. And I was like, okay. She's like, yeah, we knew about your mom. We knew about the family. We knew he was in a long-term relationship with her. But we don't really talk to that side of the family. All these things that are like, I'm like, what are you preparing me for? What's going on?
Right. What are you talking about?
What's going on here? Why are you telling me this? So she's telling me all these things, and she says, "Do you know that cousin that shows up on your page, and her name is this?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I know her. I saw her. She's on my list. She's got the second highest DNA match." And she says, "Yeah, that's not your first cousin. That's your half sister." And it wasn't like she wasn't like preparing me for it. She just like let it out.
Right.
Obviously we're cut from different cloth, you know,
Right.
like there
Right.
wasn't like, how do you feel about, there was no, how do you feel?
She didn't write the letter 30 times.
No. She like used like a, what are those called? She used like a spray can, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Or it's like a sledgehammer. Yeah.
And about a month later, I got a message from this new half sister. And she says, "Oh, hi. I know things are strange, things are weird, but I just wanted to get some more information. I don't know my dad, but I've heard this from my mom about him, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, okay. And nothing sounds weird. That's like, oh, he has Spanish roots. I'm like, this makes sense, you know? We had a grandfather who had red hair. It's like, okay, I don't know. I don't have any pictures of grandfathers. And I saw his messenger. I said, so I think the common person that we have is this person. Do you have anybody with that last name in your family? Because I'm trying to like get her to realize like you're in a different situation. You don't realize the situation you're in, right? Because she keeps saying this guy's name, this other guy's name. She's like, my dad was this guy, my dad was this guy. And I'm like, that's not your dad.
Oh. She thinks you're the son of a different person.
She thinks we're both the child. She thinks she's the daughter of a different person, and that exactly, and that I'm possibly the son of that same person.
Oh, my stomach just like turned inside out for everybody. Ooh.
Well, and it gets crazier because we're 11 months apart. And where I told you earlier, I was working at a hotel. I worked at a hotel. I also worked like at a Kmart when I was a college student. And she lived on that same street, who was on the rival tennis team from my school. So her schools are like 3 miles apart.
Wow.
And it's the weirdest thing because I'm talking to her, and I said, I'm trying to like ease her into the whole
Yeah.
thing. I'm like, do you know this last name? This is the last name that maybe binds us. After that, it's like radio silence for like maybe about 3 weeks.
Oh.
And I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. And I guess my role now is to wait to see what she needs. And I have this information now, this knowledge. I've gone through this whole thing now with my son. Am I going to, I don't know this person. What am I going to be there for this person? And at least in a perfunctory way or like an initial way? Like, I don't know what. So I messaged her and I said, hey, look, if you ever want to talk, this is my number. You feel free to call me. And it's interesting because she calls me and we talk for like maybe an hour and a half. And there's all these things in common, right? And she's like, well, tell me about yourself. And she's like, that makes sense. That makes sense. For some reason, she kept saying, that makes sense. Yeah, my brother would do that. Yeah, my brother would do that. And I said, yeah, like, look, I said, I want you to know that this is all I know about this man. I said to her, it's like, I found a picture of him. I was like, look, I've done all this work so that you don't have to do this work. This is a picture. These are 3 pictures of him. This is what I know about him. This is what I know about his family. And this is who I have heard he was, both from my mom and from other people. And so she says, well, my mom told me a different name. My mom told me a different story. And she's not talking to me right now because she's very upset that I'm even looking into this. Right. So I'm like, look, I understand. And I obviously don't want to cause any problems. So just, if you need me, just call me. And it goes on like that. Like we talk for a few months at a time, like maybe a month or two will pass and we'll talk on the phone. And then I said to her, I was like, oh, do you want to do a FaceTime call? Because we hadn't even seen each other. I have like 3 pictures of her to go by. And she has like 3 pictures of me to go by. And in one of them, I'm like 4 months old. And so we got on FaceTime. It's the weirdest thing. Get on FaceTime. And I'm excited. I told my wife, I'm like, hey, I'm going to get to have a FaceTime call with my half sister. She goes, oh, that's great. And I go into the office in our house and I call her. And the first thing I notice is that we have like the same facial features, like around our eyes. And like she says, our ears are the same. I was like, I never looked at my ears in that way, you know? And then just as abruptly, we're like maybe 30 seconds into a conversation. And she says, you know what? I'm sorry, I have to go. And I was like, okay. She goes, my ride's here. I got to go. And I went, oh, okay. All right, no worries. And I would get messages every once in a while, like maybe every 3 or 4 months, like, hey, hope you're doing well, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, it's like radio silence again, right? So it's been probably about a year and a half. And every once in a while, I would just ping a message out. Hey, hope you're doing well. I hope all is good. Just trying to keep things light.
Mm.
And I don't know. I haven't heard from her. So I I completely get that it's like so many different feelings. And the first conversation it was like it was effusive. It was like, I'm always going to be here for you. She was saying like, you know, I will always be here for you. You never have to, all these things that are very like big grand statements, right? And I'm just like, okay. And it's like I don't have any expectation. I don't have any of those expectations. If anything, I was just trying to be of service. Like
Right.
I don't want you to have to take years or months or years to like figure out the basics. I'm just going to give you the basics. All these things are happening. All this radio silence is going on. Obviously, it's a weird thing because to let somebody else into your life. Like
Mm-hmm.
I read your newsletter. You're talking about your road trip
Mm-hmm.
and about possibly meeting up with half siblings. And I can't even imagine. Like to me, that sounds super exciting. Um, and but also like wow, that's heavy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially like face to face. I can't even imagine. And then like the time to drive and think about these things. I'm putting thoughts in your head.
I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about the drive. Oh no.
No, I don't want to ever get in the way. So like I totally get it. I totally understand. I totally get it. There's like no ill will, no ill feelings because these things are so convoluted. And I would not be surprised if like a year or two down the road, like other half siblings reach out because I know there's other half siblings.
Right.
It's like I know of them. They supposedly know of me. They're not on any of these sides, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like, what can you even say?
Yeah. I feel like you represent this like futuristic ideal of people already having the information of our community so that when people come to you, you're like, oh, I know what this is. This is an NPE situation. I will act accordingly.
Right.
And it's okay. It's totally okay that your half sister doesn't realize what a gem she's got in a half brother or like, but it's her experience. And but it would be so wonderful if more and more people knew like you, not because they've gone through it necessarily, but just were more familiar with what was going on with these DNA tests and the sort of like probability perspective, and you knew how to act. So you still haven't heard from her in a long time.
No, I haven't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I may never hear from her,
Mm-hmm.
like the feeling I got was that she has another brother and, she talks to him infrequently,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so, and it's like, I have siblings and I'm not always particularly close with them. There's
Right.
disagreements or there's different ways of seeing the world. And so I don't expect that it's going to be like, oh, we're in lockstep now. It's not like
Right. Right.
twinsies, it's like,
Right.
it doesn't work that way. It's, you're dealing with, I don't know her background. I don't know how she was raised. I don't know how she sees the world. It's like, I don't know if we share the same worldview. I don't know if that's something that's passed on in DNA. I do not,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
there's so many different questions. And especially like, even when I hear, like, there was some sort, the other thing I was going to tell you is like, it's so good to hear your podcast. I mean, every podcast has its place, right? The tone, the tenor is really important. And because these are such heavy things, and they can be such heavy things. It's so good to be able to have a place where you can have a light conversation about really heavy things. You can joke
Mm-hmm.
about things because
Mm-hmm.
it's like I don't know if you ever saw that Joan Rivers documentary.
No, I never did.
She was in the middle of her bit and she made a joke about like some disease. I don't know what it is. I don't remember what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, this heckler stands up and goes, "Hey man, that's not funny. You can't joke about that." And she said, "You have to joke about it because otherwise it kills you."
Mm-hmm.
That's how you beat it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I always remember that because it's like, as seriously as things can be, like I have a finite life. At one point, I will not be here. At one point, this stuff will not matter, you know? So I'm not going to take it that seriously. I'm going to be sensitive to people's feelings. I'm going to be there for myself. Oh, and that's the other thing I was going to say is like, I'm glad I went through the time of therapy because I think I needed to be there for myself in order to be there for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't imagine, you know, it's like spinning two different plates in two different directions at the same time.
Yeah, how nice that you could then give the space to your son.
Yeah. I'm really lucky.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky in that I had the resources that I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people maybe they don't have access to therapy as easily, although it's more common now. And maybe they're dealing with somebody who is not as informed about these situations, so they can give them if you're dealing with a therapist who's never dealt with this stuff, it's a different world. The rules are different. They just are. The rules that we create for ourselves outside of it are like those are just the rules that we've created. But no one ever set rules for this kind of stuff because the technology wasn't there before.
Right.
So like it's a different world, and like it's so tough to not be judgmental about it,
Mm-hmm.
especially on the outside. Because it sounds crazy when you're on the outside. At some point, it becomes so normalized. Like I hear other stories, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a situation where that's like, or like you kind of see it coming, But it's really good to have a place where you can have a breath of these conversations, and it doesn't feel like you're suffering through it again, because it's a human experience. It's going to have humor. It's going to have funny things. It's going to have weird things where you're like, I didn't expect that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why, I'm really appreciative of the work that you do. I really am. Like it's really, I know it's helpful for me. And, so I was on one of these secret Facebook groups. It was with, fathers who are dealing with the same situation. And they're all it's funny because some of them are dealing with the situation of they found out they have a child. And, some people are finding out that, everyone's in different situations.
Right.
And everyone's just trying to help each other. It's like a little colony of ants just trying to help each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny reading it, but I think it's something different hearing people's stories and their voices and having a conversation where it's not like, it's not exploitative, it's not like doubling down on sorrow. It's just like, it's being what it is, yeah, because this thing isn't going to go away.
It's not going to go away.
Especially like I remember there was one episode that you said something like, I think it was at the beginning. You said, I have friends. I don't misquote you. Friends who, they've decided that they're going to tell this person that this person is their father, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it makes sense at a very basic understanding.
Yeah.
I think like in a rudimentary way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is good, so I'm going to pair this good thing, my chocolate and my peanut butter, right?
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense without technology. I'm not defending it,
No.
but
yeah. But even apart from that, like once you do that, it's like here's like what I was going to say is like you set into motion all these things that are going to have an impact on generations to come.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the person, you know what I mean? It's like you're going to take the genie out of the bottle. You're going to make an irrevocable change. You're going to align things that are not necessarily the best. Like if the goal is to like make it through the world and to learn about yourself and to develop and grow and what is it like self-actualize,
right?
It's really tough when you have a reset. I can imagine, because it's like I have the same questions about my family as well. Like when I think about my father's side, I have those same questions. But like I said, I've been dealing with them since I was a kid.
Right.
you know? I haven't dealt with them since I was an adult.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting way to think of it, or to describe it, to experience an identity reset as an adult, to have to start over with self-actualization. Yeah, I like that description.
And it's funny, I had a buddy who he was adopted. He knew he was adopted, never knew his biological parents. And he went through the ancestry situation as well. And he found out that his half sister actually worked in the building across from us.
Wow.
And his family's from the Midwest. You know what I mean?
Huh.
And and I don't want to tell his story, but like his happened before I was ready to talk to my son. So it was interesting hearing his perspective on dealing with meeting his mother, and then like feeling rejection,
Right.
which is like I see it now. I understand it. I can totally get it because it's so wrapped up in the self, right? To the point that like, my poor son, when he was dealing with his grandparents, trying to tell him the situation, that's where you see like all the denial, and you see all the stuff that's wrapped up in identity, and like their role as parents and as grandparents. And when it comes down to it, like it has really nothing to do with anybody except the child.
Right.
Like me as an adult, I'll get over it. It's like I'm already over it. I'm in a good place. I'm happy. I'm like, my concern is taking care of my family and making sure that I'm there for them, and learn how to be the father to a soon to be 30-year-old. It's like, that's new to me. I don't know that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But also like being a father to a 3-year-old in 2023. And what does that mean? It's like, I'm glad to be able to tell the story, because I can say to other birth certificate parents that it may seem like it's about you. It's not about you. Like, your story is in the past. You know what I mean? It's like, you can go back and deal with it, but your story that you thought is going to be different, and you have a heavier responsibility because you signed up to be a guardian, and that means like you're a guardian for life. It's like, I mean, that's my philosophy. I'm sure some people think differently about it. I mean, that was one of the bigger things for me to kind of understand and get over, was like, all these, it's not about you, man. Yeah, things aren't fair. Yeah, there was lies. Yeah, there was deceit. Yeah, you know, uh, that relationship should have happened that way. You know what I mean? That marriage was annulled for a reason, but it doesn't matter. And those things brought me to this point, right? It's like everything is like a zig and a zag,
Right.
And maybe like I'd be a way different person, but I kind of like where I'm at right now. I don't feel, I just want to be like prepared to help. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want to have like I don't want to look at it through like the prism of me, It's like,
that's very evolved.
it's really tough. I've had time with it. Trust me.
Yeah, I think it's so much of it is time. So much of it is time. It's so hard.
And it's like, people just have to give themselves time, but it really makes a big difference. And at some point, like, all this stuff just starts subsiding, and you get to like, there's parents who are present and they're jerks.
Right, totally.
You're not going to escape it, you're not going to escape difficult things. And I mean, like, for me, it's like, there's really no point in being angry. For my son, I mean, he can feel whatever he feels. He's living through it.
Right.
I'm just, to me, it's just a recap in my head. I'm not living with it.
Right. Yeah, my heart goes out to him, of course. Hope he gets and finds all the kind of support and community he may need. And it's neat that you can offer some knowledge about those things and recognize that it's his own journey.
Well, you actually were helpful for him as well, because before I told either of them anything, I was like, "Oh, I'm listening to this podcast. You guys should check it out." And, "Oh, what is it about?" I was like, "Oh, it's about, these situations with NPEs and blah, blah, blah." And my son goes, "That's crazy."
It is.
Oh, you think it's crazy?
Yeah, you have no idea.
You have no idea, ready?
Mm-hmm.
He said, "I've heard about that stuff." He's like, where people try to trap each other and they do these things and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, it is about that, but it's also not about that. It's also about like a whole range of other things that it can't ever just be about somebody got trapped, somebody got suckered. So when they heard these stories, and I did tell them about, what was the gentleman's name again? Was it
Jason and Miguel? Jason and
Jason and
Miguel. Yeah.
Miguel? And when I said, you've got to listen to this episode, it's really hard. It's really interesting how even going through a tough situation, like these people have found like their core, right? They found like their commonality. Yeah, it is inspiring because so often it isn't like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So often it can get really messy. So I don't know what to say except like my heart goes out to everybody who is going through this for themselves or for their families. But it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's not like a life or death thing. It really isn't. Like, you're here. You made it. You're here.
Right. You're here so far.
Yeah, you're here so far. You're going to deal with, what is it? Like they used to say, like, I don't remember how it is. Like, you're only strangers to your friends or whatever. And like, they're only strangers now, right?
Right. Right.
These people are only strangers. Maybe they'll always be strangers, but like, you'll learn more about yourself. I don't want to be Pollyanna about it. I'm just saying, like, in the grand scheme of things, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. It's so hard to have perspective depending on where you are in it, right? Like in the journey. But it would be so wonderful if we could guarantee that everyone will get to that place of it feeling better and having a different perspective. And we can have the hope that you do, the hope that they do, right? Like keep striving, keep hanging in there.
Yeah, because people don't want to have these conversations. Like you always say, it's about spit and about fluids, right? And it is. It's about the messiness of human existence, right? But people don't want to have those conversations. They don't want to have. They don't want to know these things. They're not ready for these conversations yet, And it goes deeper.
Totally goes deeper. It's so much about how much we as a society,
right,
are not good at having difficult conversations. Like I feel like we missed that day in class, and now everyone is scrambling to face these hard times, right?
No, and then like as you, it's almost like digging for wells or whatever. You think you hit bottom, and then all of a sudden there's a whole other bottom that you never had expected to be. I don't know if that's the right wording I should use, but there's a whole thing there that you did not even expect. Like I've heard it on a couple of your interviews. It's interesting no one's really brought it up, but you had a couple of interviews where I could hear that the conversation was going towards like mistimed bonding between siblings and stuff like that. No one talks about that kind of stuff. No one talks about what it's like that you're supposed to bond with your family since a young age, but now you're being forced to bond as an adult. Or if you want to bond with this person, what does it mean to let somebody else into your life if you already have it formed? And then what does that open up to? Because it's almost like they are strangers,
right? Yeah. We don't. Yeah, it's so awkward. It's so awkward and weird. And what we want versus what we need versus what we're capable of. It's messy.
Yeah. And it's like, ideally, you're in a situation where it's like you're the member of the clan that got lost and now you're back, It's like they didn't know you were around, and then you found your way back, right?
Yeah.
And when I hear those stories on your podcast, it's so great.
Yeah, it's so fun when they meet. Yeah. When people meet and it's like they were just the missing piece all along and everybody gets along and their first meeting goes 9 hours because they have so much in common and they can't believe it. Like, right. If only it could be like that for everybody. It really isn't.
And it's okay. That's the other thing.
Right. And that's okay too.
And it's all right. And it's like, if you don't have space for someone, like, that's all right. It's like things take the shape of, there's no playbook, like
right.
There's no way that you can anticipate every single situation with all these different dynamics. And people are uncomfortable having conversations about like the birds and the bees with their kids. So how are they going to have a conversation about something that's different?
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah. I know. Say people get uncomfortable having the birds and the bees conversations with their partners, let alone like their kids. Right.
Yeah.
It's all, it's just so much more to the world than we were presented.
Yeah. And like, I can't even, and this is where I switch gears and I try to be empathetic about like the mothers who are in this situation, because
Mm-hmm.
you can vilify individuals, but I think when you vilify and you generalize, it kind of sets everybody back a little bit.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just brings more shame. It brings more judgment. It brings more, I don't know, man. It's like, yeah, hold people accountable and be upset
Mm-hmm.
with people as individuals, but it's like everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own way that they got there, and everybody has their reasons for their decisions. And I'm sure that they were doing the best they could, right?
Right.
With the information they could.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are just scammers,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Sure.
just the way
They're
they'll
out
always
there.
be.
Yeah.
Some people are borderline personality disorder,
Mm-hmm.
and some people are,
Right.
narcissists, and you're going to get that too. But you're also
Yeah.
going to get somebody who's in a tough situation, who thinks they're doing the right thing, or that doesn't know that they're not doing the right thing.
That's true too.
So I don't know.
Case by case basis. Well, thank you so much, Ivan, for coming on here and talking with me and sharing your story, and also for just kind of like being a righteous dude out there in a world where there are so many who are not. There's so many because I'm reading about them every day in the support groups, and I'm hearing about them on the podcast, and I'm meeting these people in person, where people like you in your position, birth certificate fathers, are not handling it the way you handled it or are handling it. So I wish there were more. There probably are some great birth certificate fathers out there. In fact, I know there are. I know a lot. I know some of them. I've heard those stories too, but it's just nice and inspiring to hear a story of someone handling it the way you have. And of course, also, my heart goes out to your son and him figuring it out, and your sister your half sister who's on her journey, her NPE journey.
Oh, thanks, Eve. Yeah, no, this is a big part of closure and healing for me too, because it's almost like there's got to be a reason for all this stuff, that for me I can't just hoard the information to myself or the experience to myself.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, it's like, that's the way we learn from each other. That's how as a community you can kind of help each other and be there for one another. It's like, if there's somebody else that's going through the same situation and they're just finding out about this and they don't know where to turn, because when I was going through at the beginning, there were not any resources.
Right.
So to just throw a little pebble in there to do one little part,
mm-hmm.
It's really helpful. So I'm really glad, and I'm really thankful for you for having this platform and for making the time and balancing all these different things, including your own journey, because it is a journey, So, like, hats off to Eve, because it isn't easy, man. And this is such a cool show.
Oh,
and
thank you.
It's such a good place. Yeah, seriously.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful that Ivan told his story and that he's come into my life. It was kind of hard for me, and maybe you could tell, I was struggling to not say things like, wow, your son must be so grateful for you. Or, I hope your son knows how lucky he is to have you. Because I had those thoughts, but I really want Ivan's son to have his own experience, like in our community. And I want him to have the freedom to navigate his journey his own way. And I want to tell people when and where and how they should be grateful or appreciate, see how lucky they are. I think everyone is resistant to that idea, being told how and when to feel. But I'm also learning like more of how much of a trigger language that can be, especially for adoptees. And I'm just seeing how it can feel so forced and grossed for people in all sorts of situations and dynamics. So, So I guess I just have to focus on my own experience with Ivan and not project my shit onto anyone else. I am grateful for people like Ivan. It's just been a note here or there over the years, but his support means so much to me. Otherwise, behind the microphone can be kind of lonely. And I was talking with my friend Dawn Anderson tonight. He has a podcast called Missing Pieces NPE Life. It's fantastic. Definitely go listen to it. So Dawn and I were texting a little tonight because he posted something on his social media about a review he got and the review was not very nice. And I happened to notice that it was written by the same person that recently gave me a bad review. So that was funny that this person doesn't like either of us or our podcasts and felt like taking the time to write about it publicly. So we were laughing and texting back and forth about it. But the more that we chatted about it, I have to be honest, the more anxious I became, because this person states in the review that they are an NPE, like they're a part of this community. And I know that I make a lot of jokes about leaving me a review no matter what, if it's bad or good, or let me know what you think. You can be honest. But I have to say, I guess I just want to remind you all that we are human. Like, I am a real person with feelings, and so is Dawn Anderson. I put on a brave face, but I am just as vulnerable as anyone else. Insults hurt worse and last longer than compliments. I wish that wasn't true, but that is the way I'm built. I know I'm not alone in that. I'm sure there are people out there that relate. Anyway, it's for these reasons I'm thankful for friends like Dawn. And the whole point of all this, the reason I'm bringing this all up is because it makes me extra grateful for listeners like Ivan, who take 1 minute out of their life to shoot me notes of encouragement every once in a while. So that's just to say, if you know someone who's working on a project out there, say something nice. You don't have to lie. I'm not about that, but a friendly note can go a long, long way. And if you don't know anyone else except me, well, I guess you could shoot that note in my direction, and it would be better even in the form of a review. And if you really feel like you have to write something unkind, okay, I will take those reviews too. Like, I'm here. I signed up for this. I know that. But to the supporters, today I say thank you. Really, really, I really mean it. If you're someone who has the process journal called Who Even Am I Anymore? You could go over to Amazon and review that too, or review that instead of the podcast, one or the other. You could do both, no pressure. This is the first process journal of its kind for our community. I designed it with open-ended questions to help people like me, probably like you, think through and process their DNA discovery experience in a way that I hope feels guided and contained. You can work on it alone. You can work on it in a group. You can work on it with me. I tried to make there be a lot of options, but you could start by finding it on Amazon or my website, everythingsrelativepodcast.com. By the time this episode hits the podcast platforms, I'll already be all the way in Petaluma, California. That's my hometown, folks. It's a little bit easier to spend summer there than in Los Angeles, although it means that I'm recording episodes from my childhood bedroom, which is all sorts of layered, as you can imagine. But anyway, I hope you are getting whatever you need to make your summer feel a little easier if it's hard. I hope you're getting what you need to make summer feel slower if it's fast, cooler if it's hot. Eat some watermelon. Stop at the lemonade stands. Run through the sprinklers. And hey, thanks for listening and sharing this podcast. I'm Eve Sturgis. This is Everything's Relative. Bye-bye.
Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis is produced by Eve Sturgis and Kaylin Egan and edited by Joy Rumel. Logo designed by Ivy McNally, and music is used with permission from Goodbye the Band. Eve is a licensed psychotherapist, but her podcast episodes are not therapy sessions.